Well, I think we're ready to get started for the deep dive this morning. So welcome all of you that join each Monday morning for the deep dive. We're so grateful to have you on and be a part of this as we kick the week off. Today's Monday, November 1st, already November. So getting into the countdown towards the end of the year. Good to see everybody this morning. And I want to go ahead, and get started here. And the topic this morning is dealing with those that think a market crash is coming. So I want to talk about that, take it from a unique perspective this morning. Those that, you may come in contact with during a holiday party, over the next 60 days between here and the end of the year, maybe even into the new year. A lot of people going, is this market going to last? Is this market going to crash? I think it's going to be one of the big questions. We did a webinar last week, Keeping Current Matters, answering the 5 biggest questions in real estate today. And this was a big question that came up, dealing with those that say the market is going to crash. So our research team put together some perspective on that I want to share with you. As always, you can go grab these slides if you're a KCM member in the member area, use those for conversations, but I'll share my screen. And we'll start off with that this morning. This is a little bit of maybe a 102 version of talking with someone who is saying, is this, is real estate going to crash? And I want to give you kind of 5 causes of an industry crash. This would be no matter what industry you're in, what would cause an industry to crash? It'll give us perspective on how to have that question. First one, the item or service becomes obsolete. I'm going to give you an example for that. I'm going to show you where we stand relative to real estate. Second, demand for an item or service drops dramatically. That certainly could cause an industry or a line of business to crash. 3, demand for the item or service was artificially generated. We'll talk about that. 4, supply of that item or service increases dramatically. The economic effect of, increased supply lowers prices, and that can be defined as a crash. And last, demand for the item or service was impacted by an outside market dynamic, and we'll talk about that as well. So all of this to give you perspective on talking with those that say, hey, I think this market's going to crash, or hey, do you think this market's going to crash? And a lot of people have a lot of opinions there. What we always say is have a relevant market opinion based upon facts. And we know most of these opinions are not based upon fact. They're based upon fear. They're based upon what someone said, and very often have very little to do with facts. So let's go to the first question here. An item or service becomes obsolete. Think Blockbuster or Netflix. It's the classic example where, Blockbuster had a chance to purchase Netflix and they said, no, we don't think so. We're gonna hunker down here on VHS tapes, and we know how that worked out for Blockbuster. So let's apply that to housing. Is housing becoming, more or less obsolete? Well, 2021 State of the American Homeowner from Unison came out recently. And here's what they had to say. 64% of American homeowners say living through the pandemic has made their home more important to them than ever. 83% homeowners say their home has kept them safe during the COVID-19 pandemic. 91% of homeowners say they feel secure or stable or successful owning a home. Why is this important right now? It's important for this reason. Back in 2010, there certainly was a trend in this country where many people said, you know what, I don't know if owning a home is going to be, going forward, the American dream. Homes lost value. Maybe renting's a better option, and I can protect my investment because that was challenged. Let's look at today. We can confidently say, coming out of the pandemic, home has become much more important to folks all across the country. Is home becoming less obsolete today? No way. Home is becoming more and more important to folks all across the country. And we can look at that and say, okay, would an industry crash when it's becoming more and more important to people? Now, I'm not suggesting that's the only reason, but let's start there and say, okay, if you were talking to someone, ask them this question: do you believe home has become more important through the pandemic or less important? The answer is easy to that. And certainly low interest rates, certainly those wanting to get into housing. We've seen a rush into housing. We've talked extensively about that at Keeping Current Matters. If you're a KCM member and you're educated, you're well prepared to have that conversation. But that's an important perspective to bring into this conversation about a crash. Let's look at the next question. Demand for an item or service drops dramatically. Think restaurants in the summer of 2020, last year. If your business is based upon people gathering and eating, and then all of a sudden you can't do that, you're in trouble. That certainly put restaurants in a tough position. Some made it, some didn't. But you can say, okay, that could lead to an industry crash when you have something like that. Now, let's talk about where we're at right now. There's a lot of talk in real estate about real estate slowing down. We've covered this. I covered it last week. I'm going to go back to a slide that I covered last week. The showing index as compared to last September, but then going back to the Septembers prior to last year. There's definitely less activity. You can see slightly this year over last, but we've settled into a market that's well above where we were in 2017, 2018, 2019. I'm going to call those the last 3 normal years leading up to the pandemic. But here's the kicker. I want you to take a picture of this slide. I want you to use this slide. I want you to use it as perspective when you're talking to clients that you serve, when you're talking to people in your office. It's this right here. Bill McBride says this: sales non-seasonally adjusted in September were 548,000. That was 2.7% below September of last year, which was 563,000. Now listen to this. Excluding last September, which was definitely distorted by a delayed selling season in 2020, sales non-seasonally adjusted were the strongest since 2005. Let me read that again. Sales non-seasonally adjusted were the strongest since 2005. We're in a very, very good real estate market. Yeah, year over year, we've seen a little bit of, September over last September, but remember, we crammed all that business into the last half of the year last year because of the front end of the year, the pandemic coming on and all the reasons we know. But no doubt we're in a very, very good market right now, even though some are saying it's slowing down year over year, and they're technically correct, but it leaves out the context of where we actually sit. The other component to this, demand or service dropping dramatically, is the other question: do you think the real estate market's going to last? Is this market going to last? Definitely a question that'll come up as you come in contact with people, I'm going to say, over the holiday season, over the next 60 days. Well, let's go back and look at this. I reminded you this last week on the deep dive. 6.5 million homes sold in 2020. We're going to surpass that this year, and forecasters are saying we're going to surpass that next year. Very, very good real estate market. Nothing in there saying the market's going to slow down. Now, do we think the robustness of this market is going to continue? Well, I think that's where forecasters are saying that's going to slow down. It's certainly not sustainable. I'm not saying that, but there's not a dramatic decrease or anything like that forecasted into next year. Going to be a very, very important question as people ask, do you believe this market is going to last? The opinion that you can derive from that based upon the facts and experts and what they're saying is right here. Let's go to the next question here. Demand for an item or service was artificially generated. Think home loans in 2006, 7, and 8. I talked about this extensively when we said, why this isn't 2008 all over again. We can confidently say, looking in the rearview mirror, that demand for homes was artificially inflated coming into the crash. Why? Because many got home loans that they couldn't otherwise qualify for or afford. When you think about all the different products that were in the market from a loan perspective, no income verification, no job, no asset, none of that. Just tell us what you want, how much money you need, and we'll give you the loan. And we know how that ended up. Okay, we can say that demand was artificially generated. So listen, let's look at our industry over time. This is a report from the Urban Institute. If you're a KCM member, you're familiar with this. Lending standards have been getting tighter. This goes all the way back to 1999 and looks at product risk and borrower risk. So a healthy lending standard, or a reasonable lending standard, you see there in the middle, it's going to have a little bit of product risk and a little bit of borrower risk. Think product risk is the type of loan that's in the market, and the borrower risk is what will be, what you'll have to be able to qualify from a, an asset profile to credit, profile, all of that. And what do we know? Since the housing crisis, Product risk has been virtually eliminated in the mortgage market, and borrower risk has been seriously pulled back. If anything, I've said before, I think the conversation will be, we need to get more folks into homes, and we need to loosen credit for that going forward. And oh, by the way, in the last year, this has gone down. There's some products that have left the market. You remember last year when jumbo, kind of sat on the sidelines for a little bit, a lot of investors saying, you know what, I'm worried about forbearance. I'm worried about those affected by the pandemic. And lending standards have gotten a little bit tighter over the last year. So we can definitely say we're not where we were. We can definitely say we're not in a state where demand is artificially inflated for the mortgage business. If we also want to take this a step further, we can go back to NAR's credit availability index. We've referred to this multiple times at KCM. The way you read the credit availability index is the higher the reading, the easier it is to get a loan. The lower the reading, the tougher it is to get a loan. This goes all the way back to 2004. So pre-crash, you see, it was super, super easy to get a loan. The reading there of 868. And we dropped off that pendulum swing back that we talk all the time about, or used to talk a lot more about in our business. And standards have not returned to where they were. They haven't returned to where they were pre-housing crisis. If anything today, you see that dip down at the end, what I just talked about. Standards have gotten a little bit tighter over the last couple of years through the pandemic. So confidently we can say, okay, we're not in the environment that we were back then, and people that are buying homes today can't afford them. I've talked extensively about equity in homes coming out of the last 10 years. The shining star of the pandemic is, people have treated equity differently in their homes because of a lot of the things that happen to people, a lot of the bad experiences that people have. So we can look at that confidently and say that's not the cause of a crash. Let's keep going here. Supply of an item or service increases dramatically. Think the housing crash 15 years ago. What caused that? We saw all of these builders building, supply dramatically increases, and we have a drop in value. Back then, almost 20% loss in home values during the housing crisis. Where do we stand today? We are in a significant deficit in homes across the country. In this seller's market that's been prolonged, and we know all the things we've talked about, appreciation in the market, all the things across the country that we know that's brought from, competing deals to, folks getting frustrated trying to buy a home. That's all been because of a lack of supply. Now, if you're not well versed in this, go into KCM and look at some of the charts and graphs for construction and why we're in that situation. But in no way are we looking at a situation where we are oversupplied in the market. But the question that brings up is, what about all those foreclosures coming out of forbearance? I think this has been handled pretty well in the media, and I think that truth is getting out there of, we're not going to see a wave of foreclosures coming in the real estate business, but there are a lot of people concerned. There are a lot of people that are not in our business that don't have, what we can fall prey to is the curse of knowledge and say, well, I know that's what's going on there. Or maybe you're watching today and you don't know what's going on there. I'm going to give you kind of a little bit of perspective on that. But there is not this outward or this forward facing look of this massive amount of homes that's going to come in the market through foreclosure. So let me break that down. If you look over the last 5 years, again, 2017, 18, and 19 are what we have to look at for normal, about 290,000 foreclosures a year in this country. Back in 2020, because of the moratorium, we had about 129,000 foreclosures in this country. First half of this year, 19,000. So there are more and more foreclosures coming on the market, no doubt, as the moratorium is lifted. And I've talked about that, the misleading headlines there, but we'll end up this year significantly short of where we've been in the last 5 years. Matter of fact, the first 430,000 foreclosures would just make up for the last couple of years. We actually haven't gotten that inventory on the market. Now, we don't wish this upon anyone. It's certainly a crisis for someone, for they and their family. They're going through this, but it happens in our business. But as those homes come on market, we certainly don't see that. And I'm going to break down what what could be a possibility for foreclosures. But right now, there are 1.24 million homeowners that are in forbearance right now, and that number is coming down significantly. Expect to see that in the coming months continue to come down as more and more people come off of forbearance. But if we go back to what Black Knight tells us, 1.24 million mortgages in forbearance, we know that 7% of those have less than 10% equity. Well, if every one of those with less than 10% equity, and I'm not saying that, but let's play that out as a worst case scenario. If every one of those went into foreclosure, that's almost 87,000 foreclosures. You add the 19.5 that we had in the first half of the year, and that gives you a total of 106,000 foreclosures. Well behind where we've been the last 3 years. Now, I've talked a lot about this, that we need to remain vocal in our business about this. We need to continue to talk to people about this because there will be those affected that will need to sell. And what's the benefit of where we sit today is they have an option. They have an option to sell. They have an option to go ahead and, and put the house on the market, sell it oftentimes more than the list price. Take that money, those proceeds, pay a commission, put some money in their pocket, and hopefully move to the other side of the crisis they and their family are facing. Very, very important, very different from where we were, back in the housing crisis. Last point here, I know I'm going a little bit over on the deep dive here. Demand for an item or service is impacted by an outside market dynamic. Think about Hummers or large SUVs in the early 2000s when oil prices skyrocketed. If you remember that time, they really at that point stopped making Hummers. They started saying, okay, do we want to make these big SUVs? People started to say, do we want to buy them? Is it going to cost that much to fill it up? If you remember that time, some people went out and bought and said, I'm going to buy one. And many of us were thinking, gosh, that's the last thing I'd want to do. I want to buy something more economical. And certainly we've gone that direction in a lot of different ways in the car business, but that had a massive impact on large SUVs. Well, what's the outside dynamic that could have an impact on our business? It's easy. It's mortgage rates. No doubt. That is the one outside dynamic that you look at. Those shoot up, demand is squelched in that, and that could cause an issue. So let's go back and let's look at that and unpack that for just a minute as we wrap up here. If you go back and look at 2016, 17, 18, and 19, and I could go all the way back to 2010, and I can tell you it roughly fits in this same picture. Rates had been hovering between 3.5% and 5% over about the last 10 years. Now, what happened in 2020? Pandemic happens, Fed acts, Fed can't control interest rates. They can only hope to influence interest rates. Well, the Fed influences interest rates, and we see them drop to record lows somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 3/4. What's happening right now? We're starting to be in a rising interest rate environment. We've certainly seen that happen over the last month. And this is what it looks like where we're at right now. Where are experts saying we're heading? Well, into next year, 3.5%. I would say the estimates are between 3.5% and 4%. And we don't have to be able to forecast that direct number to say we're heading back to where we were, to where we've been for the last 10 years. I don't see that as an outside dynamic that's going to squelch demand in home purchases across the country. Is it going to get more expensive for folks? Absolutely. Is forecast appreciation forecast to go up? Absolutely. It's going to cost more going into next year, but not a market dynamic that's going to turn off the market. So I hope that gives you perspective. I'm going to stop sharing here, Jessica, and ask you if there are any questions in just a minute. But no doubt, this is going to be a big question that's going to come up as you interact with more people in the coming weeks and months and holidays and different things out there. And I'm not suggesting you're going to try to turn every holiday engagement into a listing appointment or to something, but can give you perspective to share with people what you see happening, so that you can say, hey, next week, let's get together. Let's talk about this. Are you thinking about doing something? Are you thinking about selling in a year or two? Now may be the time. Are you thinking about buying? Now may be the time to do something there. So Jessica, any questions coming in?
just one today.
Okay.
Tamara said, can you explain what you mean when you say borrower risk? I understand the product risk, so just borrower risk.
Sure, that's a great question, Tamara. Borrower risk. So if you think about borrower risk, think about, okay, what asset profile do you need to obtain this home loan? What savings, what what reserves do you need? Think about credit score. What is the minimum threshold for a credit score? That would all be balled up into borrower risk. So what happened in the housing crisis is we said, okay, a lot of people can get loans. There isn't a threshold. And then there was one defined after that. If you remember back then in the real estate business, we talked about the pendulum swing. It got a lot harder for folks to obtain home loans. And that was due to increased guidelines in the mortgage business. When we talk about borrower risk, that's all about guidelines and what mortgage companies will accept. Any others? All right, well, I'm going to wrap on that. It's always great to be with everybody on the deep dive on Monday morning. I'm grateful for the time you invested, and we've got a lot of folks on today. Share the deep dive, share it with somebody in your office, share it with somebody you've been talking with, so that we can get the message out there and that you and other agents in our industry can be well prepared to help people make powerful and confident decisions on their housing. Our goal at KCM is always to save you time and money. If you're not a KCM member, I want to invite you to go to trykcm.com and start a free 14-day trial. As always, I enjoy doing these deep dives. Love having you on. Thank you to the KCM team that works so hard to prepare these every Monday morning. And we'll see you back again next week. Take care.